Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome everybody. My name is Jawahar. I'm here hosting this new series that we are starting today called Afternoon Coffee with Legrand Data, Power, and Control. Let me take a quick moment to introduce the series as to why we are here. The whole thing started a couple of weeks back when, as you all know, all our worlds turned upside down. And so a couple of us were brainstorming like how are our customers dealing with it. So we decided let's check in with them. So we started a series called Power Tips Live, like in the sticker here. That was a way for us to connect with our customers while we share some of the tips as to how to use our products the best, and also all the remote capabilities that are built into it. That series has been a very good success, and so we decided, okay, let's take this further and widen the conversation. And that's when we came up with this idea of an afternoon coffee chat. So what we have realized is in the past, like when we get together for coffee or just run into each other at cafeteria, we have a lot of stories that we tell each other from the field, where we have worked with customers and excuse me, we have understood their challenges, and we've come up with some creative solutions for those challenges with our own products. But mostly it's through some creative thinking and out of the box thinking. So we thought it'll be a good way to share those kind of stories with the wider audience and with our customer base and beyond. And that's how the whole series idea started, and we're kicking it off today with you all. So I would like to thank you all for joining. I have two great speakers today to discuss today's topic. So I'll introduce the first one. You may have seen him in the speaking circuit. He's Marc Swift. He wears multiple hats at Starline, and the two of them are very unique. He heads marketing and also engineering. Think about that. That's a very unique combination where you not only understand and interact with customers, but also you have the ability to now take that back to engineering and come up with some creative solutions. So I would like to welcome Marc.
Happy to be here.
Hey, Marc. We don't see you though. There he is. Welcome to Coffee with Us. We also have Marc Cram joining us. He is our next speaker. Marc Cram has spent a lot of time in a lot of industries, so he has pretty much answers to all the questions we may have. So I'm pleased to say I work closely with Marc. We look into new opportunities and new industries where we can take our data center products to. So I would like to welcome Marc at this time. Hey, Marc.
Cheers, everyone. Good afternoon.
So real quick, the topic for today is flexible power for smaller edge locations. So I'll start with you, Marc Swift, that is. When we think of Starline, what comes to mind generally for me is rows and rows of busways with a lot of tap boxes that are feeding a whole lot of racks of service. But I don't think of smaller spaces when I think of busways. Is that just me, or is that how most people perceive Starline?
It's kind of a mixed bag, Jawahar. That is a good question. You know, when people do think of Starline, there is generally propensity to think of the larger facilities. So cloud hyperscale applications, larger enterprise deployments, where scale is definitely on the side of the facility. But actually, we have a long history of providing products to smaller spaces as well. If you actually look back into history and understanding that a little bit, it'll make sense to you. So the Starline products now are a little bit over 30 years old, actually 32, 33 this year, later in the year. We started out in interoperability labs. So a lot of the equipment manufacturers the Ciscos, Juniper Systems, Sun Microsystems at the time, were using our products as part of their manufacturing scenarios. So they actually had smaller spaces where they would rack up equipment, and as part of that manufacturing process, they would burn in the equipment. So it would be running for a couple days. They would verify that the equipment was running properly, and then that equipment would then be powered off. The racks would be unplugged from the busway, and the next racks of equipment to be powered up would move in. So we have a long tenured scenario in that type of environment. We still sell into that market today. The other market or sub-segment of the data center market that lends itself to smaller applications from a footprint perspective are the telco and cable providers. So that was an early adopter crew for us as well. So if you can think about it, a lot of especially on the telco side, you have a central office in the main headquarters where the traditional telephony services were deployed. And then you have remote sites, which are just smaller and what we could classify as edge locations today that actually are built out within their respective networks that have a smaller subset of equipment to deliver services to the last mile. And just the flexibility that those facilities need now. And that really started when the higher level services started to come of age, both on the telco and cable side. So when the telephone operators started to offer DSL services, higher speed internet services for residential and commercial customers. And then similarly on the cable side, the cable modem infrastructure that was deployed out at these sites as well. So there were some, changeover requirements, a little bit more flexibility needed more than the traditional wiring methods provided at the time. So actually, like I said, we have a good history in these smaller applications, as well as getting closer to the end users out further within people's respective networks.
So that's interesting because the whole conversation started for this topic when we were talking about edge locations.
Right.
We've seen many kinds of edge locations where space is very limited, and then edge itself is such a wide topic. We can't just say edge is this one thing. So I want to turn it to Marc Cram to kind of set the stage for us as to how many kinds of edge are there, and is there an easier way to kind of bucket them into fewer categories?
Well, Jawahar, that's a good question, and something that you and I have spent a little bit of time studying. We've seen edge be defined as a single box on a light pole, and we've seen it go as big as the hyperscale data center that's sitting in a metropolitan area. In between, there's a lot of different steps. We've seen single cabinet type of applications. We have seen single rack applications. We've seen multi-rack applications in the form of micro modular data centers, things like a Vapor IO or an Edge Micro type of company where they're putting anywhere from 3 to 6 racks in a small enclosure. And then we've seen things where people are redeploying space in the basement of an established building, and that could go up to between 10 and 50 racks. So it all just depends on where you are, what type of infrastructure is around you, what you have access to for connectivity, and then what you're trying to accomplish. And we're finding that CDNs and other types of companies that are distributing large streams of data are very interested in making use of this entire spectrum of what are potentially edge data centers.
I just couldn't help but notice the Darth Maul behind you on your bookshelf, so that kind of distracted me from the question that I was going to follow up with.
He's missing his lightsaber.
Well, so now those are spaces that we have some experience with, but when we put a bill of materials together for these spaces, generally we didn't even think about Starline for at least a year in the past, right? Because Starline just recently became part of Legrand as a Legrand company, So now that we have that ability to have a broader solution that we can offer, I want to ask Mark Swift, like, is there any space that you would consider too small for a busway deployment, or is there like a minimum footprint that you would recommend to even consider Starline?
No, really, Jawahar, it comes down to application and what the end user is looking for from a flexibility and feature perspective in that space. As we mentioned earlier, you know, the cloud and hyperscale players, that's a pretty easy thought process behind why you would want to go to an overhead product like ours. But in these smaller spaces, really what it comes down to is that, like I said, that flexibility and what the end users are looking for. You know, in situations that spacing is a requirement, we have a couple scenarios that we can use to kind of combat what those physical limitations might be. So if you look at our breadth of product of all the providers in the market, we have the widest range of continuous access busway from 40 amps the whole way up to 1250. So depending upon, you know, you get into two situations there, the physical size of the product, how it can be deployed, but then also what the equipment needs from an ampacity perspective or what that run needs. And having the ability to add and remove plug-in units quickly and safely live without turning off equipment is a definite benefit for these applications as well. We've done some unique things too with the product family to incorporate our end feeds, which are the boxes that the upstream power comes into. Typically those are sold and it's a standalone device that then attaches to the first run of busway. For these applications, we actually have a subset of products that we can incorporate the feed unit directly on that first run of bus. So your spacing that you need to either get it in a facility or get it in an elevator, if it's going into an MDF or IDF room that may be on a higher level floor, or you know, if you have spatial requirements, a lot of the cable and telco hub sites that are deployed out in like a neighborhood or you know, a location further out within their plants, you know, you do run into those physical limitations. And even on the containerized side, the pods, we work with a lot of manufacturers there, and we've come up with unique offerings that fit whatever envelope that they have available to them. And just to give you an idea how flexible we can be, we not only have busway that you can change the orientation of how it's mounted and in which direction it's mounted, but then also the plug-in units themselves. You know, our typical design, you actually have a plug-in unit that you insert from the bottom, you twist the plug in to engage the electrical connection, and you've added a circuit. We have customized plugs that we can provide to customers as well that actually have the paddle, which is that stab set that comes off the top of the plug that actually come out the back. So the plug-in unit can actually slide right into the busway and turn in actually on its own axis. So your limitations above and below are not really a concern in that scenario. So as long as the busway fits in, you can install plug-in units in that same window.
Well, Mark, it almost seems like it'll be good for you to show a plug-in unit. You know, the way you were describing it. I wish you had something that you can show. Do you?
Yeah, the current COVID situation
here,
Joe, I unfortunately don't have a product here at the house, but I actually have a myriad of photographs that I can go through here and kind of talk through some of these scenarios that we're discussing. So this particular picture here, it's actually a Comcast remote site. So this was a hub that was being deployed in a more dense area for end users, both from a residential and commercial perspective. So you can see there the two runs of Starline that were deployed in this space. So you can see there's only about a dozen cabinets in this small site that was built out, like I said, out in a more residential area. And what actually gets deployed in these cabinets are typically caching servers. So one of the things that a lot of the cable providers and telco providers that offer video service, they'll cache the most recently rented movies further out into the network, closer to the customers, so that latency and also the bandwidth requirements on the core network are mitigated due to the actual content being stored closer to the home. So it's not only a utilization perspective, but also a customer experience perspective. So once again, a lot of changeover here as they add more and more servers, storage arrays out here. They have the flexibility to get in here and do work live. And you can see there two runs of bus over each cabinet gives them both the A and B redundancy they need for this particular application. Another picture to highlight, this is actually the enclosure that I discussed earlier. So this is a Crown Castle tower site where they deployed, once again, the storage arrays for content. And once again, you had physical limitations above the cabinets where you actually had to, their requirement was to install A and B runs of bus and meet the limitations of what the ladder tray and the cable management equipment overhead, as well as the height of the ceiling. So we actually installed the A and B runs pretty much side by side. So we feed the units from the other end. So the opposite ends, you can see down there at the far right, the one end feed. And then the plug-in units are those ones that I discussed where the paddle actually comes out the back of the box, and then it can rotate in on a very small and tight footprint. So you can actually see really took advantage of that space that was available and be able to deploy what they needed in this application as well. This is actually an MDF closet, so there are about 14 plug-in units there, so about 7 cabinets per row. And once again, A and B runs for redundancy. And in this scenario, they actually had a little bit higher headroom, but were able to get the A and B runs fairly close together, primarily in the same plane there above the cabinets. And once again, give them that flexibility that they were looking for the room that this was being installed in. And here's another example of an MDF or IDF closet. So once again, these are smaller applications. You can see not very many cabinets. This is actually a run of our 250 amp busway with some pin and sleeve receptacles on the face of those plugs there, feeding the equipment on either side of that run. And then here is another scenario, similar plugs to that earlier one that have the paddle coming out the back. This is actually the NBC Universal Studios at 30 Rockefeller Center. So you can actually see there, once again, quite a bit of equipment installed in a very small space, but the ceiling height was an issue in this building. So you can see too, you run into nuances occasionally depending upon where we're going with headroom, especially in the cities, going into cities like New York City and some of the other Chicago. So dealing with the aged infrastructure from a building perspective, with some of these unique designs, we can pretty much install the product in whatever scenario the customer requires. And then this was kind of a unique scenario. So we actually had a request from the Navy. They were installing a data center on one of their ships. And if you can think about a ship, you have fixed deck heights between the floor and the ceiling above. They had about 10 inches of space above their cabinets, and they wanted to deploy 2 runs of 400 amp busway. So they looked at our traditional designs, and there was no way we could get it to work in the envelope that they required. So I actually went back, we went down to the machine shop, grabbed some of the bracketry that we had available, and we actually came up with this bracket. And they joke at the factory, they call this the Swifty bracket, because I was the one that was kind of down there working on it with the crew in the machine shop. But we came up with this, and it's a customized bracket to install, as you can see there, back to back, 2 400 amp runs of bus. So they deployed this over their cabinets on the ship, and then similarly we deployed those plugs that have the paddle coming out the back, and we're able to meet that requirement of the 10-inch spacing above the cabinets for the busway runs. So it's just some of the neat things that we've done over the years and are able to provide. Finally, this one is a remote site where actually a lot of times now with the consolidation in the telco and cable spaces, you're seeing both video and traditional telco equipment being installed in these sites. So this is actually a remote site where they're actually ingesting localized video content. So they actually have satellite or antennas in the backyard, picking up the local channels for that respective market. and then adding that in with the other equipment that they have here to pull the channels that they're receiving from the major providers like a Fox or an HBO, and then they incorporate that all together for whatever channel lineup that they're bringing into that respective market. Well, as you can imagine, as new channels are coming along, things like that, people need to have that flexibility to add different channels in and equipment to support those channels, which our products fully support in that type of application. So those are just some of the pictures that I had.
That's fascinating. That's as close as you can show the real thing. Too bad the busways and the tap boxes are not as convenient for you to just have them at home like we did.
Next time,
I'm surprised you're not running your basement.
Show and tell.
I'm surprised you're not running your basement with the Starline busway.
Actually, unfortunately, I don't have any busway down there, but I can tell you I have a server tech PDU downstairs running my network equipment. So give a shout out to one of our sister companies.
Thank you, Mark.
So Mark, it looks like some of those brackets that you showed, they're not even like suspended. They are mounted on the rack itself.
Yeah, so we have we've developed some different ways to mount the product. So traditionally, Jawahar, you'll see it hanging from all thread from the ceiling above. That's probably the most commonly deployed scenario. But as you saw there, we do have bracketry that can be mounted on a wall. We have brackets that can be used for a direct mount on a cabinet. And then we do have, working with our CCB brethren, some cabinet mount brackets that you can actually mount these brackets right on the Legrand cabinets, and then the busway can be mounted directly to these brackets that would be attached to the tops of the cabinets. So once again, if spacing is an issue above, or if building ceiling or roof loading is an issue, and it can't support any additional weight due to other infrastructure that may be installed, we have a lot of unique ways that you can get around that.
Great. So I had a question for Marc Cram, because he has spent a lot of time in, like, sometimes physically in these spaces, so in these edge locations, and he's very well versed with this ecosystem of different companies that are in the space. So having been there, like, how do you see the need for flexibility in these spaces? I mean, or like the IDFs, MDFs, I understand where you do, things do change, but these edge locations, aren't they just deployed once and forgotten?
Well, in an ideal world, Jawahar, you raise a good question. In an ideal world, some of this equipment is going to go in and be used for many, many years. So, for example, you look at how long the equipment for 4G telco infrastructure was in place. It's about a 10-year cycle. But within that 10-year window, there are opportunities for updates and repairs and so forth to be made. And so the telcos and the REITs and the other players that are putting infrastructure out there to support these edge type locations are relying on things like the busway or the PDU and the rack to remain in place, but to have the ability to support some degree of dynamic as things break and have to be replaced, or as new technology comes out and they want to consolidate pieces of equipment, then they have to be able to be flexible enough to accommodate those changes. And in the circumstance here on the various scales that you saw in Marc's photographs, they have planned for exactly that. That power busway is going to remain in place. The rack's going to remain in place, but the contents of that rack may end up changing over time. And the intent is that most of the time these facilities are going to be lights out and nobody's on site. But when they need to be repaired, they need to be repaired in a hurry. And so any degree of intelligence that can be built in, like what we have within the Starline busway or what we can offer within the intelligent PDUs, gives the customer a great degree of responsiveness in the event that a system locks up or in the event that something just needs to be rebooted and reset. So they rely on that functionality quite heavily. Back to you.
And I guess one of the things that I figured out working in the data centers when we bring these Raritan and Servertech PDUs to plug into the data center infrastructure, it's far easier if you have a tap box than a circuit, right? So that's another thing that I can think of where you may not need specially trained people to do simple tasks, which could be done by anybody that you can deploy. So, well, it sounds great. So one of the things that I want to ask Mark Swift is the price of it. Like, is this going to cost a lot? I mean, you mentioned custom brackets, custom design. Anytime I hear the word custom, it brings up the image of premium, right? So is that the case? Is there a big premium because of the unique designs?
No, that's a good question, Jawahar, and we get that extremely often. There's two sides of our business. I would say one is the true customization work, and that's probably only about 20% of our business. And that's truly customized. Like somebody comes to us and, okay, we need you to make something you've never made before, or we need you to adapt something pretty significantly that it might require retesting or recertification, those types of things. And then the main portion of our work, which is what we do every day and have made a nice reputation, is our configuration work. So it's standard SKUs that we have available, breakers, receptacles, drop cords, connector bodies, etc., different enclosures that then the end user can configure in a manner that works best for their application. So that is pretty much our main runners. So if you're taking a stroll through our plant at any given day, you'll see hundreds of different styles of plugs and different things being assembled there. And we've figured out a model and a way to do that very cost effectively. So no, the products you're not charged a huge premium to configure something for your specific application. That's actually part of the work that we do every day. So it's almost, think of going to like a Subway. Like they have all the different things for your sandwich there. You can actually pick your ham or your turkey or vegetables, whatever you'd like. Our model works in a very similar way. So you get to come in and, like I said, as long as your standard items that we use, you can pretty much pick whatever you want. So it's worked out very well, and the customers have come to know and really like the fact that we can provide that to them.
That's awesome. This is the first time I've heard busways compared to Subway sandwiches, by the way. So
pick whatever you want. We can even heat it up for you if you want.
Hey, they're just anagrams, right? Subway, busway.
Right.
Oh, there you go. So at this point, I'm going to see if we can bring the audience in and see if we have any questions. I didn't see any questions on the chat, so let's unmute the audience and see if we have any questions from them.
Did.
Well, so while we wait for the audience questions, Mark, all you're missing in your background when I saw your background was a bunch of books that are leather bound with some golden stripes on them.
Well,
like
I could have flipped around here, and we got those on the other side. So I chose to sit in this direction today. So
that's awesome. I still don't see any questions, so at this point we could wrap this up. So Mark, thank you for joining, and to all our audience, thanks again for joining. We hope you can join us next Tuesday as well. So this is an ongoing series. We're going to publish the details and the topic and the links to next week's session. So please stay tuned, and we'll see you then. Thanks again,
Cheers,
everybody.
Thanks, everybody.